Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever in the world you may be joining us from today. My name is Francesco Del Carpio, and I am the CFAL York Operations Coordinator. I would like to officially open the first session of the Governance, Science, and Technology of Mass Evacuation Speaker Series, presented in partnership with YEmerge at York University, the McEachern Institute for Public Policy at Dalhousie University, and the Institute for Intergovernmental Relations at Queen's University. I would like to begin today's session with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territory upon which our campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The area is known as Takaranto and has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and that the territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. As this is an online event, our participants may be joining from various locations, so I strongly encourage you to learn about the traditional land upon which you are located. With this, I welcome our moderator, our speakers, and our participants from around the world. Welcome to our webinar. For those who may not be familiar with CFAL York, our center was established in 2020 and started its operations in 2021. CFAL York was created in collaboration between the United Nations Institute for Training and Research and York University with York Region to develop and deliver training and knowledge sharing, as well as capacity building programs across 5 focus areas, which are disaster risk, emergency management and humanitarian actions, health development, environment and climate change, entrepreneurship, digital technology and economic development, equity, diversity and inclusion, and advancing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I would now like to pass the floor to one of our co-organizers, Kevin Quigley from the McEachern Institute for Public Health, for Institute for Public Policy at Dalhousie University, for some opening remarks and to introduce the moderator of today's session. Thank you very much, Kevin. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. I'd first like to acknowledge that we're located in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. I also want to thank the teams from CFAL York and YEmerge York University and the Institute of Intergovernmental Relations at Queen's University, our partners in producing the speaker series. Today, we're excited to be featuring some of our experiences in Halifax and our ongoing work on mass evacuation in the region. We envision this speaker series as a national dialogue, and we're looking forward to featuring speakers from other regions on various topics in our upcoming events. It's our view that mass evacuation is a highly complex undertaking that is shaped by a number of social, economic, and technological factors, and as such, the expertise does not lie in one set of hands. We aim to create a forum for national dialogue on relevant issues, drawing practitioners and academics together from a variety of disciplines and perspectives on each of the stages of evacuation. Through this and other initiatives, we aim to better understand the context in which mass evacuations occur and to improve how we plan for and respond to these events, which are occurring much more frequently. Thank you for supporting that goal through your attendance today, and I hope you enjoy the session. I'd now like to introduce our moderator for the panel, Dr. Ida Mamuji. Dr. Mamuji is an associate professor in the School of Administrative Studies in the Disaster and Emergency Management Program at York University. Her research focuses on social vulnerability capability in the disaster context, hosting and resettlement, international response to natural disasters, and risk assessment. Dr. Mamuji is currently working on a book project capturing the lived experience of various vulnerable groups facing disasters across Canada. With that, please welcome Dr. Ida Mamuji, who will review some housekeeping notes and introduce our first speaker. Over to you, Ida.
Thank you so much. It's my honor to be moderating this panel today, the first in what will be a strong series that I'm sure everyone will benefit from. Today, we're going to be talking about the role of humanitarian supply chains and transportation mapping in mass evacuation planning. Transportation and humanitarian supply chains are the backbone of mass evacuation operations, enabling emergency managers to deliver crucial aid to affected areas and populations in a crisis. Leveraging transportation data gives emergency managers and planners at all points of the supply chain valuable insights that allow them to enact more efficient and effective mass evacuations in the face of a crisis. Today, we are so lucky to have three very experienced and well-accomplished speakers: Dr. Ahsan Habib of the Dalhousie Transportation Collaboratory, Dr. Ali Ülkü of the Center of Research in Sustainable Supply Chain Analytics, and Erica Fleck, Director of Emergency Management for Halifax Regional Municipality. And each will explore the complexities of transportation and humanitarian supply chains in planning for mass evacuations. What we're going to do today is I'm going to give each speaker 10 minutes to kind of deliver some opening remarks, and then we'll delve right into questions. So for all our participants, please, I encourage you, while listening to the speakers and as you reflect on the content being shared, go ahead and click on the Q&A tab on your Zoom screen and type in your questions. I'll look through them and collate them and then ask them to the speakers at the appropriate time. So we'll begin then with Dr. Ahsan Habib. Dr. Ahsan Habib is the director of the School of Planning in Dalhousie's Department of Civil and Resource Engineering and the director of the Dalhousie Transportation Collaboratory, or DalTRAC. DalTRAC is a multidisciplinary transportation and planning research facility that aims to contribute to transportation studies, planning, and analysis at the local, regional, and at national levels. Dr. Habib believes multimodal mobility options are the key to ensuring sustainability for Canadian cities. Dr. Habib, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I believe you can hear me. So today I would like to give you a bit of high-level research outcomes that we were working last 10 years, mainly motivated from Katrina and Rita when it happened, and we thought like we are a coastal region, so our transportation lab should have some role in understanding how we can evacuate people, particularly when there is a mass evacuation necessary for any kind of hazards. So I will give some learning that we have done. We have a long-lasting partnership with McCracken Institute and many other partners to advance the modeling part of this work. Just a second. So we all know, probably I don't need to introduce why this risk of natural disasters. Hurricane Dorian is one that we experienced in recent time. As at the same time, the wildfire and many other extreme events are becoming more and more common. And in certain time, we really need a plan for our transportation. Generally, we design our transportation network mainly for peak hour period, mostly PM peak or AM peak, but there is a need to really understand the demand in different points in time on those disaster periods so that we have some sort of a work done. And in this case, we in our transportation field use different kinds of decision support tool, particularly for highway investment, transit investment. But we thought similar kind of ideas as well as modeling framework we can use for mass evacuation. So we started this as also inspired by this hurricane forecasting and prediction. They are so accurate in this case, in this time period. In transportation, we are doing forecasting for a long period of time, sometimes corridor analysis, sometimes area based, sometimes the whole regional city. And for regional plan, like these are effective tools. So we thought like let's try some of those traffic forecasting tool be utilized for some of the most vulnerable places, which is Halifax Peninsula. In particular, we have limited exit, 5 exit, 2 bridges, 2 highway, and during daytime the population doubles. So we thought this is a very good idea to explore. So what we did, just in a very high level, we tried to collaborate with a couple of climate change researchers to come up with the flood risk model We developed our Halifax network model, including all the links. And then we developed some sort of dynamic traffic assignment process, because uncertainty and the traffic travel time is very important, and the congestion and capacity issues are important. We did a couple of validation and calibration as well. One master's and two PhD, two masters and one PhD worked in last couple of years to get to the point that I will be presenting to you. So flood risk model wise, like Halifax Peninsula, if you are aware about the East Coast, we tried to model 2.9, 3.9, 7.9, and 30 meter when we don't need to do much except calling the Coast Guards. But for the 2.9 and 3.9, those are possibilities, and these came mainly from 100 years sea level rise forecast, as well as many other environmental factors. We lose certain infrastructure, certain highways, say our rotaries. So we try to estimate those areas, armed and rotary, as you can see, percentage of roads impacted by flooding. But we should also keep in mind, it's not only the percentage, higher percentage is problematic, that strategic location are problematic too. As you can see, Armdale Rotary, which connects our Spryfield, the entire area could be quite a problematic for evacuating people through surface road transportation. So we coded all our networks in Visum, which is one traffic microequation simulator. We have tons of data from our own collection of Halifax. We know the traffic demand in each given point in time. We assume that it will be 10 a.m. when we get the highest number of population in the city, so that we can model the extreme scenario for these purposes. Halifax Peninsula generally has a 58,000 population, but it doubles, or right now maybe it's more than double. So it's a good exercise to see what's going on. We assumed a couple of assumptions. First of all, of course, these scenarios that I talked about, the flood scenarios. We also assume that there is no incidents on the road. No accident, everything is going well. In general, from a traffic point of view, it's not free flow, it's just the regular congestion built up due to the historical narrow road. So we ran the model for all those scenarios, particularly 2.9, 3.9, and 7.9. We can evacuate entire peninsula at some point in time, but as you can see, for 2.9 and 3.9, it takes almost 22 hours to 23 hours. It's a long time. And the assumption is there is no accidents, no grandma saying I will not be driving anymore in the bad weather. So it's a problematic. And even if you look at the first column, the no links flooded, just 22 hours. Just instantaneous evacuation it requires. What does it tell us from a transportation network point of view? Our transportation, like we have historically narrow roads, we have a bottlenecks, we have a retrofitting of the city over the years to serve our peak hour only traffic. So we are not, particularly our peninsula is not thought through about an evacuation. We do not have an arterial thoroughfare, for example. So those needs to be looked at. So this is what we did first, just to understand, gain some hours, like what happens in different points in time. We could actually do 50% within first 6 hours, but the later part takes cumulative congestion, queue length, those consideration. And we also then added more complexities in this model in the next year. We tried to see where the possibility of collisions are happening based on historical collision data. Again, it's hard to observe what happens during evacuation, but we thought like it's a good exercise to find out the hotspots, so you can see all the darker areas are potential traffic collisions hotspots based on the data that we have. We added that in, that again adds more clearance time for us. And then we started thinking about And these are, again, since we have a smaller time window, again, some results for each scenarios, hourly and cumulative congestion, and some depiction of evacuation time in different parts of the city by distance. Then we started thinking about, okay, we know what happens is the baseline. And fortunately, we got some at least anecdotal validation once our one of the bridge, McDonald Bridge, was we are replacing, and one day, the first day of its renewal process, the bridge didn't open. So we got the whole city gridlock, and similar to what we forecasted in our system. So that gives us lots of insights and confidence on the models as well. But we also did some validation through our base case scenarios with the traffic data that we collected roadside. And then we started thinking about the countermeasures. Of course, like the engineering countermeasures, we considered contraflow and various others. We improvised some of the constraint that we have in the network. But in this presentation, I'm only picking one of them, is the staged evacuation. So we thought about, like, can we improvise a couple of the places, particularly learning from some previous hurricane in US, the low-income vulnerable population might have difficulty. We assume all car-based population evacuation. So we started looking at some staged evacuation. We identified some vulnerability criteria, geophysical, social, mobility. We did some workshop, excuse me, some workshop with practicing professionals who weighted different kinds of vulnerability. We tried to score them using some fuzzy logic technique. We tried to come up with like which areas should have prioritized based on those three vulnerability criterias. And in this results, you can see we could improvise at least a couple of areas. West End and North End generally is not as improvised area in terms of income. Downtown was one big problem for us as well. But South End have a better roads in terms of road length. But we did improvise quite a bit on the low-income area, West End and North End evacuation by prioritizing them. But we couldn't do much better in the downtown area, and that's reasonable because lots of parking lots there, lots of commuters coming in there. So we see that that's still a big problem. So after this staged evacuation, we also looked at other countermeasures. For instance, a bus-based evacuation. We looked at other possibilities of bus-based plus staged evacuation combinations. So in summary, what we tried here, we tested, excuse me, a evacuation simulation model, which can be visual. Even you can see the car running through, like, so it's easier for decision-making tool for many practitioners. And we tested those countermeasures, and looks like they work, but it doesn't completely eradicate our issues. So we are still working on those. Particularly, we are looking at mobility assistance people, those who need how to evacuate them, and also trying to find some evacuation route for the city for those kind of work. So this work is continuing. We are trying some experiments in virtual reality as well in these days. That's in general like what we are doing or up to at this point. And thanks to all the graduate students for putting together all this research. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Habib. That was so enlightening, and it's so interesting to see how much complexity you're actually able to add to the models. I'm sure we're going to have some questions around that, but for now, we'll move on to our next speaker, Dr. Ali Ülkü. Dr. Ülkü is a professor in Dalhousie's Department of Industrial Engineering and the School for Resource and Environmental Studies. He's the director of the Center for Research in Sustainable Supply Chain Analytics, a supply chain research hub focused on developing analytical solutions to complex issues in supply chain management. Dr. Ülkü believes in the science and teaching of better, and is an avid supporter of student-led research. Dr. Ülkü, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Aida. Actually, my home department is a business school at Faculty of Management. The other industrial engineering and SHREDS, they've been my cross appointments. So it was very nice to listening to Ahsan. He gave some specific examples, and with this very brief talk, I'm hoping to maybe to complement from more so from a conceptual point how humanitarian supply chains could contain mass evacuation as a part of its operations. Again, thank you for the opportunity for working on this together. We all know, but I thought this is important to again to highlight due to maybe the composition of our audience, to emphasize that we are actually in a climate changed world already, and climate change is impacting everything we do, and it has quite a bit of ramifications, including their impact on supply chains. And again, it's important to emphasize that all the businesses run on supply chains. And as you will see, I will try to create some parallelism or orthodoxy between the commercial supply chains and the humanitarian supply chains in next coming slides. But here's a fact. The global mean temperature was approximately 1 centigrade degrees higher than the pre-industrial levels in 2021. And when we say pre-industrial level, it's about 50 years, 1850 to 900, where the industrialization happened with steam engines and trains and so forth. And we have seen between 2015 and 2021, the highest 7 warmest years on record, and back to back. And let's see what's in store for 2024. We've seen those increases actually in the last couple of years as well. So the types of course, climate change is a big umbrella term, and underneath we have a number of events that some events that are happening that fall or that are instigated by climate change in a vicious circle. So we see, for example, heat waves, wildfires, drought, storm and floods all around, more frequently and with more severe impact. According to this figure, most of my slides are taken from some of my recent papers, and this was a joint work with my postdoctoral student Namye Yoon. It was published in Sustainability. Between 1960 and 1970, there were about 1,000 registered cases of climate-related events, and this number significantly increased to about 7,000 cases from 2000 to 2022, marking it a 7-fold rise. That's huge. And referring back to Ahsan's presentation, they were simulating the case for flood happening. I think that is right on, because we see that floods are the highest events that are a consequence of the climate change. And next comes the storms, then droughts, wildfires, and heat waves. And as we see from 1940s, you can see from 1940s, there's almost an exponential increase in these events happening, which is quite alarming. All right. So what will be the impact of climate change on that supply chain management? Just to maybe, I hope I'm not being too educated, but what do we mean by supply chain? A commercial supply chain. Whatever we buy from stores or comes to our home, they are all part of supply chains. And if you're paying for whatever you buy, again, it will be a part of a commercial supply chain. And with supply chain, we think from sourcing to manufacturing to distribution, retailing, until consumption, and sometimes to the returns of the product. all these stages involved in fulfilling a customer's requirement is called a supply chain. And naturally, the climate change has big impacts on supply chain performance, and they create disruptions. For example, extreme weather events, like they will cause in hurricanes, storms, floods, heat waves, and so forth, and they will cause disruption of transportation infrastructure, and that will create supply delays, increase logistics cost, and so forth. And other disturbances such as sea level, again, they could damage port facilities, create coastal transportation disruptions. It will force maybe some transportation routes to be replanned, rechanged, and so forth. And some just to give some other disturbances, we can think about precipitation changes, ocean acidification, for example. It will disrupt seafood supply chains. It will have impact on aquaculture, biodiversity loss, disease outbreaks, which we have severely experienced during COVID-19. Here, I'd like to emphasize that it will disrupt labor availability for sure, and it will have impacts on healthcare supply chains. So they're all intertwined. The focus here was on commercial supply chains, but also I'm aware that we are talking on mass evacuations, which I will tie in a bit. So another term that was used in the earlier presentation was risk. It's an unavoidable term. With the recent paper that I showed with my postdoctoral Dr. Yun, we have defined climate change resilient sustainable supply chain risk management, CCR-SSCRM. It's a long acronym, in which we look at various climate change events. And with the risk resilience, we have to intervene before the risks happen. And then we look at the impact of them on throughout the supply chain from what I call the QBL perspective. We all know, particularly in business word, TBL, the triple bottom line that looks at people, planet, and profit. But with the inclusion of culture as the fourth pillar, QBL, things get more comprehensive, and our analysis on supply chain performance and its operations become more realistic. And then we'll look at some ways to mitigate these risks, such that supply chain vulnerabilities will be reduced, resilience could be increased, and sustainability should be contained or enhanced. So I think a key term here with this inaugural seminar is to keep sustainability always on the back of our minds, even though we are dealing with disasters, with evacuations, responses, and so forth. It should be there. And from a solution perspective, again, I will focus on sustainable supply chain analytics, where we look at analysis, simulation, optimization, and the highest level of cognitive approach, which will be self-learning. So again, here the focus is on some analytical approaches to solve very complex problems like mass evacuation planning. All right, the differences I will just highlight. Commercial supply chains goal is essentially profit, but for humanitarian supply chains, we want them. The goal is not. It's a non-profit activity, and we'd like to have rapid delivery of emergency relief during this crisis. Just roughly put, and there are many differentiations as well. I think it's good to maybe just go through the definition of a sustainable humanitarian supply chain. Again, you will find this one in one of my recent papers with my colleagues, Jim Bookbinder from Waterloo, and my postdoctoral student, Dr. Nam Yi Yun. again published recently in Sustainable that looks at Industry 4 technologies and humanitarian supply chain sense. So sustainable humanitarian supply chain management is the viable integration and timely and effective coordination of humanitarian aid organizations, civic groups, specialized task forces, governments, and first aid responders to design and implement all humanitarian logistics systems and operations. Our goal there is to save as many lives as possible. So that's the societal impact at the least cost possible economical impact while reducing the impact of disasters on the environment, such as reducing hazardous debris, which could be quite a problem, and ensuring the conservation of and responding with equity to culturally distinct communities, such as those vulnerables that are in remote areas and so forth. So all in all, Ida, please let me know if I'm over time. All in all, how we can, I guess my point here is to emphasize that mass evacuation planning, MEP, we should look at it from the bigger lens of sustainable humanitarian supply chain management. And in MEP, we are dealing with transporting people, and that includes responders and evacuees. So we might have evacuees available to be transported, but if we did not plan, or if we don't have the supply of responders in the first place, then that MEP will not work. So again, this brings us a supply-demand approach to MEP. We need coordination at all levels, which makes the problem quite challenging. Funding and donations, preparing for MEP is again quite important. And on that note, I have a paper on donor behavior. If anyone is interested, they can look at this paper that was published a few years ago. So private-public partnership, there we might find cases where commercial supply chains, their capabilities, their resources could help humanitarian supply chains. So when I look at private-public partnership, that's one way to look at it. And also because due to the nature of the supply chains, we might learn lessons from humanitarian supply chains that could be also applied to commercial supply chains. So for example, in mass evacuations, I remember Walmart opening their retail stores and having people using it as shelter for those evacuees. So there are ways to help each other, although these two sectors seems to be distinct. It's an interdisciplinary and complex planning program. Execution of an MEP should be resilient and comprehensive. And again, I would like to emphasize that we need to embed all the QBL sustainability pillars into mass evacuation planning. So I hope this is giving an overall perspective on, at least from my way, how we can tackle mass evacuation problems at a higher level. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ülkü. That was very informative. Thank you also for sharing all those valuable resources. The recording of this session will be shared, and I'm sure people will be able to go back and find your papers. But I was really enlightened by your discussion around humanitarian supply chain management and the frameworks that you've developed. Our final speaker of today is Erica Fleck. Erica is currently the Director of Emergency Management for Halifax Regional Municipality and was formerly the Assistant Chief of Community Risk Reduction with Halifax Fire and Emergency. Prior to moving to Halifax, Erica was a proud member of the Canadian Armed Forces, where she served in Canada and overseas for different missions. Erica focuses her work on preparing and educating individuals, families, and communities in all pillars of emergency management. Erica, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ida. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for the invite today. So I'm very blessed to live in the Halifax Regional Municipality for many years now, but it does pose some challenges with its geography when it comes to mass evacuations. Halifax is one of the fastest growing cities in Canada, and it has been growing the size of Truro each year. So for those of you not on the eastern coast, Truro is a small town west of Halifax that has a population just over 25,000. So what does that mean? With any growing city, density and urbanization has its challenges, especially when surrounded by a coastline, a port city, with visitors surpassing over 500,000 during a very short cruise ship season, a military port, and ammunition depots, all with limited egress. Last year, 2023, was a record year for us here in Halifax, and not in a good way. We saw the biggest and worst wildland fire in our history, 2 major floods, all of which required evacuations, and then we had a hurricane, and that was in a 4-month time span. This year, unfortunately, is expected to be another record-breaking hurricane season, and our temperatures right now are extremely dry and unfavorable, with the water temperatures already warmer than it was last year. Here in Halifax, we've seen many evacuations over the years, but to my knowledge, none to the extent that we saw last year, where we had over 17,000 residents evacuated during a few hours during our wildland fire. With egress and density, as I mentioned, being an issue throughout Halifax, there is now a lot of heat and lights on this subject, but not a great deal that the municipality can fix outright, just due to the level of government and land, who owns what land. Residents who have moved here years ago or built in quiet suburban areas with only one road used to be joyous at the solitude with homes surrounded by water and woods, but now have come to realize the risk and challenges that solitude poses. One of the biggest issues posed with any evacuation is the horsepower, but more importantly, the willingness of citizens to listen. We all know that most citizens will panic, move to a primary vehicle while under stress and trying to evacuate. As Ahsan mentioned earlier, the timeframes from his modeling, we know that we need to do it all, we know that what we need to do in all cases is to limit the amount of vehicles on the roads and turn to mass transportation. We need to do that to alleviate both bottlenecks and accidents. With egress being a challenge, as both speakers have mentioned, how are first response vehicles going to get in and out when everyone is trying to get out on the one road and the one bridge? The good news is that with a growing urban front is that our public transportation fleet has increased as for both buses and ferries. We do have sufficient capacity to do large evacuations if required using public transit systems, and this would be the most efficient use of resources with a dense population on our existing infrastructure, particularly on the peninsula area. But with any evacuation, that requires coordinated efforts and training and modeling between all agencies, stakeholders, and communication will continue to be the most vulnerable point in reaching citizens. Now, if we were to throw supply chain issues into this, just think of the pandemic and the challenges that we saw getting toilet paper into the maritime provinces. But in all seriousness, it does have the potential to have huge impacts on businesses and services. Being a port city, as mentioned, is beautiful, but leads to extreme vulnerabilities and risks. Coupled with climate change, we are now seeing increases in all coastal erosion around their coastline, increased flood risks, and modeling is showing that our downtown area will be well underwater in 25 years. We need to continue to work on robust evacuation plans, improvements to evacuations, engaging a whole of community approach with a focus on preparedness and resilience, and continue to work with all of our peers, both academically and community-wide across Canada and the globe. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Erica, for sharing your perspectives with us. I want to remind all our participants to please type in your questions in the Q&A tab. I've received some questions already, but before I begin, Erica, I just wanted to kind of touch on this idea that you mentioned, the fact that we do need a whole of community approach. And, when we're talking about these supply chains and mass evacuations and trying to address the whole of community, what do you see are the main barriers in your opinion?
The main barriers are, education, communication. Those are the top two. And, how you need to practice in order for people to feel comfortable. We all know that people are going to panic. It's the natural reaction, that stress-induced, just go on autopilot. You're not going to listen to the radio. You're not going to do what they tell you to do. If they're telling you to, not get in your car with your kids and your pets and, what's urgent to you, people are not going to listen to that. They're going to hop in a car and they're going to drive on the road. They're going to get stuck. People, again, will panic. Accidents are going to be caused. And this, we see this all over the world. This is nothing new here. And it's just, that is the status quo when it comes to evacuations. So education, again, modeling, being out into the communities, helping them understand what the risks are, working with them to create a better plan. We have some communities here that are very, very engaged. But the issue is when you get into the urban center, you find that communication is very much weakened. So neighbors don't know neighbors. They're not going to help their neighbors. High-rise buildings, people don't know even who their neighbors are. And it's sort of a one for all as everybody sort of, gets out to evacuate. Whereas in the urban and suburban areas, people tend to work together much better. So, when they evacuate, it's much more seamless because they are working together and they know who their neighbors are. So that's just one of the challenges. I could go on for probably a day to list a bunch of other ones, but those are the biggest ones.
Perfect. Thank you so much. On that note of challenges, Dr. Habib, you did mention with your models the complexity with the downtown core and having to evacuate there, and what would need to be required to make that any mass evacuation more efficient. What kind of collaborations do you need in order to see that change happening?
Yeah, it's a complex task for evacuation in general, but from a transportation point of view, I believe there needs to be collaboration with transit authority, public works, right-of-way groups, EMO groups, police, and a plan in place with this multimodal evacuation. It's nothing different than what we promise for good transportation planning. We need a transit plan, we need a auto-based plan, we need a shelter plan, we need a gas gas line problem, so the collaborate, even private actors. So it needs to have a series of dialogue for each cities, in my view, bringing all these stakeholders together and have a draft plan prepared for each cities for any type of risk that I can see.
Perfect. Thank you. We had a question here, which I can't see anymore on my screen, but there was somebody that was asking about mass evacuations for islands. So perhaps Dr. Ülkü, you can mention when you're looking at sustainable supply chain and humanitarian supply chain management, when you have a situation where you have an island that needs to be evacuated, do you have any insight there?
Thank you. Thank you, Ida. I think that will be a good case to look at. Ahsan might talk more about the situation because he's done already some simulations. We are not on an island in Halifax. Still, it's a peninsula, but it could easily turn into an island where the roundabout, if the roundabout is underwater. But what's interesting from supply chain perspective is if it's an island, probably the transport they're seaborne or waterborne. The transportation is done through ships, and there is an inevitable coordination that needs to be done between the commercial ships and those ships that are maybe destined to do the evacuation, so that it's more like it's expected, because there's no other way of evacuating people from the island. Well, you could also use helicopters, and that might be one thing. But depending on the type of the event, is the wildfire, is it an earthquake, is the flood, things will be different. So I guess the point is, for each of these possible scenarios, we should have a plan where coordination is achievable between the commercial resources and the governmental, federal, or provincial resources that has been spared in anticipation of these events. But it's a good point. We've had to absolutely consider topography of the impacted area before we can make any plans on them, and prepare for. We look at all the scenarios, but we should prepare for the scenario that is not showing up in our list. So that's the hard one to find, but you never know. You might have all the plans ready, but maybe, like I was saying in my talk, maybe there will be some other incidents impacting volunteers, first line responders, and so forth. So that might things more complicated, and I will call it, maybe there are some situations, and I turned that in one of my papers, disaster within disaster, because disaster happens, it's already messy. Like Erica was mentioning, how people are panicking and so forth, and creating any logistical burden on that impacted area creates another disaster, which is something we of course don't want.
In fact, talking about compounded issues and disasters, there's a question here for Dr. Habib and Erica. Are we reconciling concerns over housing pressures with the need for emergency response for those new neighborhoods or high rises? Do you want to share your perspective on that?
Ahsan, did you want to go first, or?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. There are concerns about it. Even I believe today there is a council meeting in Halifax about housing accelerated fund, and there are lots of debates about how do we tackle this housing crisis at the same time, thinking about not only evacuation but also transportation in general. Right, there is one crisis which might create another crisis down the line. So there are discussion going on those kind of things. But in my view, let me put it this way, as a transportation planner, I think if we follow good planning principles to change any special structure, whether housing and transportation, and these are the two like kind of tools for mass evacuation or objects, I think we should be fine. It's like making sure we are not violating grossly some of those transportation needs for extreme events or any type of events. I think if we have enough hierarchy of roads, like the basic principles, systems approach that we learned from transportation planning and housing. But you are obviously right, Kevin. There are that concern, and there are debates going on. How should we build this new neighborhood, or how do we reconcile with housing pressures, but at the same time not making another crisis to happen in the future?
Yeah, thanks for that, Ahsan. So I would just add that, obviously, everything is a risk. So, we need to look at, do a risk mitigation and do the matrix for each one. So we do know as we increase that density within the urban core, particularly and specifically along the peninsula, we need to be very careful in how that's built up. So as Ahsan mentioned, it's actually at council probably right now. And they are talking about the plan, to increase the high rises, the levels. What I will say is, unfortunately, due to all of the events that we have had, our planning and development department, works very closely with us to say, okay, what can we do to decrease that risk? So when you look at even, which way the doors are pointed, how wide are the roads? Do they have to add in, other egress routes again, coming in and out? So all of those factors are being taken into consideration with the urban density increases. And we just have to look at it from a risk reduction strategy, understanding that the growth potential, the areas that it's going in, are there flood risks there already? And everything added into that so that, hopefully we can mitigate all those things in the future years.
Thanks so much. On that, when it comes to the models and tools that you're using, I have a question here around whether any of the tools take into account human perceptions of personal risk. So, when you're looking at mass evacuation planning, and everyone feels like they're the most vulnerable. How do you take that into consideration? Is there any way that you can simulate that?
Okay, I'll jump in. Theoretically, yes, but observing those and implementing them is not didn't happen. Say in our case, we assumed every person is rational and listen to the instructions and have not like the other types of other set of constraint. One piece that really creates challenge for mass evacuation modeling or planning is we cannot collect data as the disaster happens. It's sensitive, it's risky, it's not allowed. So sometimes like it becomes really hard to understand like how that human behavior or human factors may play out. But again, like the way we try to mitigate that is with certain assumptions and other kinds. I actually tried to collect data during Tantalum wildfire and couldn't be successful. Just to learn about it, but again, those are complex piece, but it's possible to accommodate them, at least a measure of those uncertainty, a measure of like the percentage of people who might react differently.
Perfect.
Can I add to that, please?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I would just add to that Halifax we are conducting a new hazard risk and vulnerability assessment, first of its type in Canada, and we are looking at we're looking at all vulnerabilities as it pertains to across HRM. So we cover almost 6,000 square kilometers. So it's very challenging, but part of that vulnerability is language. We're looking at the morbidity and mortality census data from Stats Canada. We're looking at health data. We're taking all of that information and we're layering it into where risks already exist from a climate change perspective, from an egress perspective, and everything else in between. So we are layering that on so that we do know if we have to evacuate certain areas, we know that we're going to have increased challenges because of those vulnerabilities.
Mm-hmm. Great. I have a question here around how willing residents would be to use public transit. And what can be done to encourage people to leave their primary vehicles behind. Sometimes the most vulnerable people are actually the people that have the cars that want to drive out on their own. So what efforts have taken place, or can you propose for these situations?
I would say in Halifax specifically, because every city is a little bit different, every country is a little bit different when it comes to evacuations. So we haven't done a lot of work around this, but what we do know is that it does need to be done. And again, that goes into, running exercises with local communities. Some people, believe it or not, have never been on public transportation. Not once in their lives have they been on a bus. A lot of people have not ridden the ferry to cross from the city of Halifax to the city of Dartmouth. So we need to make that more comfortable. We need to, again, continue to communicate that, practice with communities, getting out there, again, putting them on a bus, showing them how we run the route in a neighborhood that the bus can actually fit through. We have neighborhoods where fire trucks can't fit up driveways. So I know people will be very concerned that if a fire truck can't make it, how's a bus going to make it? So we look at all of those things, but it really comes down to education and communication.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Perfect. I have a question here around whether there's any management for spontaneous volunteers. I'm not sure if anyone has anything to say, perhaps Dr. Ülkü, anything that you came across in your work around humanitarian crises and humanitarian supply chain management and volunteers?
Not particularly, but I know that it will be quite important. So I was just thinking while my colleagues were responding questions, I was thinking about the earthquakes that I've gone through my life, and I was born and raised in the area close to Cyprus, mid-South Turkey, and that area well, it was one of the major cities that was hugely impacted with the earthquake that happened in Turkey last year. And when an event like earthquake happens, which is not necessarily the case for Halifax, but maybe it's quite relevant in West Canada, like Vancouver Island. It is like all the lives, including animals that are under the debris. You don't have a chance. You don't go and say you're more vulnerable than the other, and it boils down because the infrastructure is so much damaged, could be damaged, that the trained professionals, it might be too late until they arrive and rescue. So sometimes this is just a piece of metal that you need to uncover that brick, for example, to save one life. And at that point, I guess, I don't know if we will call this volunteerism, but everyone trying to help each other. So maybe general, and that has to be the case at that point. Whoever is alive is trying to help the other until professional help arrives, you know? Um, um, I guess the general, just like financial literacy that we need for all of us, like we need to learn really, we need to learn, understand how money works and so forth. I think we should have a national strategy, and I don't know, we might have it already. You know, Erica might better answer this, but on how to respond to various disasters, and just like CPR, you know, like how to protect yourself from the earthquake, from the flood. What do? When it's flood, you don't want to go downstairs, but you want to go up to the roof or something, you know. Or when these things happen, are we ready? Generally, we read the documents, but actually doing all these drills from a high rise, how do you evacuate those many people? So some general education, civil education, if you will, that will be quite helpful. But on terms of mass evacuation, it could be quite tricky, because as the concept says, it's mass evacuation. So you are not rescuing, you know, specific groups, but you want to evacuate the people in masses, and you need bigger transportation modes for that, like public transport and so forth, buses and so on. But that creates also some additional risk. Those buses could be prone to some damages, and that creates higher risk. So that creates higher risk of maybe you know, having maybe those people who were rescued now, they might die on, you know, some fallout on a bridge or something. So it creates, like, the whole planning has to be super well designed. I think yeah, that's what I will say. Well, on that end, in terms of the equity and accessibility and vulnerability. So again, going back to mass evacuation, what I see most important is people knowing how to go to a mustering point. And I can talk about finding the optimal position, optimal locations of those mustering points. But developed cities and older cities like Halifax, these points are preset already. So we have to work our planning around what we have as infrastructure and what we have as mustering points. So the question boils down how to get all the people, depending their cultural sensitivity, their vulnerabilities, to a mustering point that is closest to them. So it's on to the building designs, for example, how vulnerable people will have a better access to transport themselves to the mustering point as fast as possible. I would think the solution should be around those areas while we are building new skyscrapers, I would say, in Halifax.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ülkü. We do have so many more questions that unfortunately we're not going to have time to address in this particular webinar. I know we're already over time, but I just wanted to see whether Dr. Habib or Erica, you'd like to just say any last words. Otherwise, we'll have to close just in light of the time. So if there's anything that you'd like to say, please, if you can wrap up the session, that would be nice.
Well, thank you so much, Ida. I just want to say thank you to everybody for attending. This was very short. It felt like it was 5 minutes long. There's so much work to be done on this topic, and there is no cookie cutter approach. Every city has its challenges, just like every country. I've worked around the world, doing evacuations in Haiti and in other places, and similar challenges when it comes to where you're located on coastline and things like that. But there's just a huge amount of work to be done, and it can't be one organization. It really needs to be all stakeholders, government, and beyond that to work together. So thank you very much.
Most welcome.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Okay, with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Asghari to close off the session.
Hi, I'm not sure if Professor Asghari is going to be able to speak right now. So I'll just like to echo my thanks to everybody. Thank you so much, Dr. Habib, Dr. Ülkü, and Erica Fleck for being here, for presenting. It was very informative, and thank you so much for answering as many of the questions as possible. Thank you, Ida, of course, for moderating today. And thank you to everyone in the audience for participating. Thank you so much as well to May and Hunter for the ASL interpretation. It's been a great way to start off the series, so thank you again to everybody. Just as a reminder, this will be a monthly series, and so the next session is on June 18th at the same time, 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And of course, thank you to all of our co-organizers, YEmerge, the McEachern Institute for Public Policy, and Queen's University. And yeah, Dr. Marmuji, if you have any last closing remarks.
No, thank you so much. I seen one question that's been repeated a few times, so I'm going to just ask it. I know we're out of time already, but the decision support tool that was mentioned by some of the speakers, if you have the name, if anyone wants to just kind of say it or type it in the chat, we have somebody who's really keen to know what tool that was. So this decision support tool. Okay, that's all.
Okay, great. Yeah, if anybody could just hop on really quickly to answer that or put that in the chat, that would be great. So yeah, and with that, just once again, thank you so much to everybody. It was a great session. It was a great way to start off this speaker series. Oh, and I see that Dr. Habib there has put it into the chat. So yeah, that's the answer. There is, oh, that it was built in-house at DalTRAC. So it doesn't seem to be publicly available. Okay, so with that, thank you so much to everybody. And I think we can end the session there.